It only took one fateful evening to destroy the illusion of my perfect life. I always believed betrayal was something you read about online or saw in movies, until I stood frozen, staring into motel room number 12. Inside that room, my entire world came crashing down around me, and the people I trusted most shattered my heart beyond repair. Little did I know the cost of their deceit would leave scars deeper than I ever imagined. My name is Ethan Mitchell, and before that dreadful night, my life was as predictable and comforting as a classic American sitcom. I lived in Austin, Texas, a vibrant city where life was just the right blend of southern charm and modern hustle. I was an architect, balancing complex projects by day and retreating to my garage by night to restore my pride and joy. A vintage 1969 Ford Mustang gifted to me by my late father. To me, this car was more than just metal and tires. It symbolized resilience and the comforting promise that, unlike life's problems, some things could indeed be fixed. I shared my life with Jessica, my wife of 5 years, whose sharp wit and dazzling smile initially swept me off my feet. Jessica was ambitious, working her way up the corporate ladder at a prominent downtown bank. On weekends, we hosted backyard barbecues with our neighbors Lucas and Emily Carter. Lucas ran the local car dealership, always laughing louder and drinking quicker than anyone else, while Emily, his quiet but warm-hearted wife, usually lingered nearby with her thoughtful conversations. Life felt good, perhaps too good. Lately, though, there had been subtle ripples beneath the smooth surface of our seemingly perfect life. Jessica had become more distant, her late-night returns and prolonged work hours increasingly frequent. I pushed away my doubts, attributing it all to stress and corporate pressure, choosing denial over suspicion. Then came the evening that changed everything. I was deep in the garage, the sweet aroma of engine oil and nostalgia blending in the evening air, my fingers covered in grease, as I tuned the Mustang's carburetor. A sudden knock disrupted my peace. Linda Anderson, Jessica's mother, stood at the garage entrance, her usually meticulous silver hair disheveled, her face pale and eyes swollen from crying. "Ethan," she whispered hoarsely, gripping a crumpled motel receipt tightly in her trembling hand. "Robert's cheating. He's been seeing someone else." Robert, Jessica's father, was the manager at a local manufacturing plant, known around town for his booming laugh and sturdy handshake. Hearing Linda's words felt surreal, as though reality had temporarily slipped out of alignment. "Are you sure?" My voice cracked with disbelief. She nodded painfully, thrusting the motel receipt into my hands. "I found this in his jacket. He's been lying for weeks." The receipt felt heavy, the cheap paper wrinkled with betrayal. I felt a wave of nausea surge as I read the printed letters. Cedarwood Motel, Room 12. The same motel on the outskirts of town, where traveling salesmen and discreet affairs found common refuge. Linda collapsed onto a nearby chair, sobbing softly. Before I could even process her revelation, Jessica walked into the garage, her crisp business attire oddly disheveled from her unusually late arrival home. "What's going on?" Jessica demanded, her eyes widening at the sight of her mother's tears. Linda's voice broke as she repeated, "Your father's been having an affair, Jessica." Jessica stared blankly, her arms crossed defensively rather than comfortingly. "Mom, men do stupid things sometimes. It doesn't mean anything personal." Her cold, detached words sent chills down my spine. Jessica's response was like a slap, emotionless and calculated, making me wonder if I even truly knew the woman standing before me. The uneasy tension between us grew palpable, a silent acknowledgement that something darker and far more personal lurked beneath the surface of our marriage. I stepped away, needing air and clarity. As I leaned against the Mustang, the comforting metal under my palms, I knew deep in my gut that Linda's revelation about Robert wasn't the only betrayal hidden in my life. The storm had only just begun, and soon its violent winds would tear through everything I thought I knew. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay in bed, Jessica's breathing steady and quiet beside me, a stark contrast to the turmoil racing through my mind. Her reaction to her father's betrayal haunted me, cold, detached, as if infidelity were merely a minor inconvenience easily explained away. Could she really view something so devastating as trivial? Or worse, had she become so accustomed to deceit that it no longer surprised her? The next morning, tension lingered in the kitchen as we prepared breakfast. Jessica moved methodically, pouring coffee and buttering toast without making eye contact. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice neutral, devoid of genuine emotion. "Ethan, about yesterday, please don't take it personally. Family drama isn't exactly new. I've learned to cope differently, that's all." "Coping?" I questioned, incredulous. "You acted like your mother was being unreasonable." She set the butter knife down sharply, irritation flickering across her face. "Look, Ethan, people cheat. Marriages get complicated. If I broke down every time someone screwed up, I wouldn't survive in my line of work." I stared at her, realizing how little I recognized this side of her. "Is that how you feel about us too?" I asked cautiously, my pulse quickening. Jessica hesitated briefly, her expression softening just enough to remind me of the woman I'd married. "Of course not, we're different." I wished her words had reassured me, but they only added fuel to the gnawing anxiety within. Later that evening, Jessica insisted on hosting her parents for dinner, claiming it was necessary to clear the air. I reluctantly agreed, not entirely, convinced it was the right move. As Robert and Linda arrived, the atmosphere felt oppressive, the usual warmth replaced by strained greetings. Robert, normally charismatic, appeared diminished, shoulders slumped under the weight of his shame. Linda moved stiffly, her face drawn with unspoken pain. Dinner was awkward, filled with forced conversation and uncomfortable silences. Jessica attempted small talk, desperately trying to maintain a veneer of normalcy, but every word rang hollow. Eventually, Linda's quiet, trembling voice broke the fragile calm. "Ethan, do you think marriage counseling could help us?" Her eyes were fixed on me, desperate for validation. Jessica shot me a look, silently pleading that I support her mother's suggestion. "Yes, counseling might help," I said softly, though my conviction wavered. Robert murmured a weak agreement, eyes glued to his plate. After dinner, I pulled Robert aside, leading him to the garage under the pretext of showing him the Mustang. Once safely away from the others, I turned, anger bubbling to the surface. "You've broken Linda once. Hurt her again and I swear you'll regret it," I warned, my voice shaking with suppressed fury. Robert stared at me, clearly taken aback, mouth opening to form excuses. I didn't give him a chance, stepping closer, voice low and dangerous. "Save it, Robert. Actions speak louder than words. Don't let your promises become more lies." He nodded weakly, visibly shaken. As he hurriedly retreated back into the house, I remained in the garage, fists clenched, heart hammering. The rage I felt wasn't solely directed at Robert. It was tangled with fear, uncertainty, and a suspicion that Jessica's indifference masked something far more sinister. Later that night, unable to sleep again, I found myself scrolling through Jessica's social media, her texts, anything to alleviate or confirm my suspicions. Initially, nothing stood out, until my eyes fell on a message from Lucas Carter, our jovial neighbor. It read, "Are we still on for tomorrow at Cedarwood?" My pulse skyrocketed, the room spinning around me. Cedarwood Motel, room 12, the very place Robert had betrayed Linda. This couldn't be a coincidence. I sat frozen in disbelief, staring at the illuminated screen, my mind racing to connect the dots. Had Jessica, the woman I vowed to love and trust forever, been weaving a web of lies right under my nose? The storm wasn't just approaching, it was already here, and I knew the devastation would be unimaginable. My entire body trembled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The screen of Jessica's phone glowed accusingly, the innocent-looking message from Lucas Carter burning into my memory. I couldn't fathom how long this had been going on. Each second felt like an eternity as the bitter reality sunk deeper. Betrayal had woven itself silently through the fabric of my marriage, right beneath my unsuspecting eyes. The following morning, I went through the motions of normalcy, each interaction with Jessica feeling surreal and forced. She kissed my cheek, murmuring a casual "see you tonight" before leaving for work, oblivious to the turmoil raging within me. Her casual indifference twisted like a knife in my gut. Unable to focus on work, I drove aimlessly through the streets of Austin, my thoughts consumed by images of Jessica and Lucas. By late afternoon, my resolve solidified. I had to confront this nightmare head-on. With dread pooling in my chest, I headed towards Cedarwood Motel, my heart pounding furiously with every mile. The motel loomed into view, its faded sign flickering weakly against the dimming Texas sky. Room 12 was tucked in a shadowy corner, its window blinds drawn tightly shut. My breath quickened as I stepped closer, the sound of muffled laughter piercing through the thin walls. Heart hammering, I shoved the door open. Inside, my worst fears manifested vividly. Jessica sat on the edge of the motel bed, startled, eyes wide with horror at my sudden appearance. Lucas scrambled clumsily, attempting to button his shirt, his face flushed with guilt and panic. "Ethan," Jessica stammered, her voice trembling. It isn't what it looks like." I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of betrayal crushing me. My voice, when it came, was barely recognizable, low and filled with venom. "Don't insult me with lies, Jessica. How long?" She averted her gaze, tears welling in her eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in days. Lucas, cowardly as ever, stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. "How long?" I repeated, my voice louder, harsher. 6 months, Jessica finally whispered, her voice breaking with shame. The confession sliced through me like a blade, raw and unforgiving. 6 months of lies, false smiles and hollow reassurances. Everything shattered in an instant. The room felt stifling, my lungs gasping desperately for air. Lucas stepped forward hesitantly. "Ethan, man, I snapped. Without thinking, I lunged at him, fist connecting with his jaw in a blinding fury. He stumbled back, knocking over a lamp as he collapsed to the floor, dazed and bleeding. Jessica screamed, rushing between us. "Stop, Ethan, please!" I stepped back, breath ragged, chest heaving. Jessica reached for me, her touch now repulsive, her presence unbearable. "Don't," I hissed, pulling away. "You lost the right to touch me." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, likely alerted by the motel management. Jessica pleaded desperately, eyes filled with panic. "Let's talk about this at home, please." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and broken. "Home? You destroyed our home, Jessica. There's nothing left to discuss." The police arrived moments later, separating us with practiced efficiency. Lucas muttered explanations, his voice muffled by shame and pain, while Jessica sobbed uncontrollably, begging the officers not to arrest me. In the cold silence of the police cruiser, my anger slowly faded into profound sorrow. The betrayal wasn't just about Jessica's affair. It was a destruction of trust, hope, and everything we'd built together. The home I'd cherished had already become a ruin long before tonight. And now, as the car pulled away from Cedarwood Motel, I understood clearly that there would be no turning back. The holding cell reeked of bleach and old sweat. I sat on the cold metal bench, my hands clasped tightly in front of me, as if I could somehow squeeze the rage out of my bones. My knuckles were still red from the punch, my mind replaying the motel, seen in a relentless loop. Jessica's tear-streaked face. Lucas crumpled on the floor. My own voice raw and shaking with betrayal. I wasn't charged. Lucas declined to press assault charges, probably out of shame or fear of exposing his own role. Instead, the police gave me a warning, took my statement, and eventually released me after a few tense hours. As I stepped into the crisp night air, the silence hit me harder than any punch could. There was no home waiting with a warm light in the window, no one to call, no hand to hold. Everything I'd built had crumbled. I had just unlocked my car when I heard someone call my name. I turned and was stunned to see Linda Anderson, Jessica's mother, hurrying toward me, her trench coat flapping in the wind. "Ethan," she said breathlessly, her eyes scanning me with a mother's instinctive worry. I heard what happened. Jessica called me in hysterics. My throat tightened. "Did she tell you everything?" Linda nodded slowly. "Enough to understand, and enough to make me realize I should have seen this coming." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thermos. "Hot coffee," she said simply. "I figured you could use something warm." That small gesture, mundane and quiet, undid me. I accepted the thermos with shaking hands, and slumped into the driver's seat. Linda leaned against the car, sipping from her own cup. "She's been distant for a long time," Linda said softly. "Robert and we were too wrapped up in our own mess to notice how badly Jessica was unraveling." I stared out at the empty street. She didn't just cheat Linda, she betrayed everything. And with him, our neighbor, someone we both trusted. Linda's jaw clenched. "Lucas always gave me bad vibes. That fake charm. Too smooth, to be honest." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of passing traffic. Finally, Linda spoke again. "If you need somewhere to go, Ethan, my place is quiet. Robert's out of the picture now. I filed for divorce last week. There's a guest room." I turned to her, surprised. "You'd let me stay with you? After everything?" She gave a sad smile. "You're the only person in this entire mess who didn't lie." That night I followed her home. The small bungalow she now lived in was modest but warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and old books. She led me to the guest room and left, me with fresh sheets and a folded towel. Lying in that unfamiliar bed, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how the hell my life had twisted so fast. But there was one undeniable truth. Someone still saw me. Someone still gave a damn. And strangely enough, that person was the last one I ever expected. The pain hadn't faded. The betrayal hadn't loosened its grip. But for the first time in days I slept. Not because things were okay, but because I didn't have to carry the weight of it alone anymore. The days that followed felt strange. Quiet, almost too quiet. Linda's home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood lined with oak trees and chirping birds, was a world away from the chaos I had just escaped. There were no slammed doors, no fake smiles, no deception hiding behind polite small talk, just the soft hum of the radio, the smell of brewed coffee, and the occasional rustle of pages as Linda read in the living room. I tried to keep busy. I helped Linda with household repairs, organized her garage, and even planted a small vegetable garden out back. Physical work helped drown out the noise in my head. But at night, the silence came roaring back. The weight of betrayal pressed against my chest, relentless and cruel. Linda never pried. She offered quiet companionship, cooking meals for two, and leaving space for me to process on my own terms. I found comfort in her presence, in the way she moved around the house with quiet efficiency, in the way she didn't force me to speak before I was ready. One evening, after a dinner of baked salmon and roasted vegetables, we sat on the porch, with mugs of chamomile tea. The sky above was painted in strokes of orange and purple, and for the first time in weeks I allowed myself to relax. "Do you ever miss him?" I asked suddenly, surprising both of us. Linda sipped her tea slowly. "I miss who I thought he was," she said. "Not the man he became, and not the man he hid from me." I nodded silently, understanding exactly what she meant. "And you?" she asked gently. "Do you miss her?" I hesitated. "I miss the life we built, the illusion of it at least, but her, the real her." I shook my head. "I don't think I ever really knew her." Linda reached out, her hand grazing mine. It wasn't romantic. It was something more honest. A quiet acknowledgement of shared scars. Days turned into weeks. We fell into a routine. Morning coffee, quiet evenings, shared meals. It was peaceful, steady, healing, until the envelope arrived. It was slipped under the front door, unmarked and silent. I opened it cautiously, heart already pounding. Inside was a single photo, my Mustang parked in Linda's driveway. Taken from across the street. The back had one handwritten sentence. "You think you're safe?" I felt my blood run cold. Linda stepped beside me, eyes scanning the photo. Her voice was calm, but sharp. "Jessica?" I nodded slowly. "She knows where I am." The shadows I thought I'd left behind had followed me, and whatever peace we had built was about to be tested. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made me jolt upright. I kept checking the front door, the windows, the garage. I even moved my Mustang further back in the driveway, partially hidden under a tarp. It was irrational. Jessica wouldn't do anything dangerous, right? But that note, that picture, someone had been watching. Close. close enough to snap a photo, slip it under a door, and vanish without a trace. My mind wouldn't stop playing. Scenarios, some rational, most irrational. I imagined Jessica lurking in a car across the street, binoculars in hand, obsessed and spiraling. By morning I looked like I hadn't slept in a week. Dark circles under my eyes, my shirt wrinkled, hands trembling slightly as I tried to drink my coffee. Linda noticed instantly. She didn't press, just placed a warm hand on my shoulder and offered a quiet, "We should go to the police." So we did. The police officer at the front desk looked skeptical at first, but when I showed him the photo and the note, his demeanor changed. He took us seriously, asked for details, and filed a report under harassment and potential stalking. "So unless she physically trespasses or threatens you directly," he said, "our hands are somewhat tied, but we'll increase patrols in the area." It wasn't much, but it was something. Filing the report gave me a strange sense of control, like I was finally doing something, instead of just absorbing hit after emotional hit. That afternoon, Linda and I installed a new security system. Cameras at every entrance, motion sensor, lights, reinforced locks. I downloaded the monitoring app onto both our phones and walked her through how to use it. It felt strange, like preparing for a siege in a quiet suburban neighborhood, but it was necessary. For a few days, there was peace. Uneasy peace, but peace nonetheless. I started sleeping again, though never deeply. I'd still check the cameras once or twice at night. Linda tried to keep things normal. She baked, she played old jazz records. We even watched a movie together. On her couch, something with no romance, just explosions and bad one-liners. I think we both needed the distraction. Despite the tension, our bond grew. There were shared looks, soft silences, long talks on the porch about nothing and everything. She understood the quiet grief I carried, and I recognized the strength behind her calm. We were two broken people trying to stay whole by holding each other up. Then it happened. It was a Tuesday evening, the sun just beginning to set, casting golden streaks across the living room floor. Linda was setting the table for dinner. Roast, chicken, mashed potatoes, sautéed green beans, a comfort meal. I was in the garage tightening bolts on the Mustang's front end, trying to keep my mind busy. A knock came at the front door. Not the doorbell, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. Linda called my name from inside, her voice tight. I dropped the wrench and walked into the house, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. She stood by the window, peeking through the curtains. I joined her. One look and my stomach dropped. Jessica. She looked like a ghost of herself. Makeup smeared, hair tangled, clothes wrinkled. Her eyes were wide and glassy, filled with a mix of desperation and something darker. "Don't open it," Linda said softly but firmly. I nodded, but my feet didn't move. Jessica knocked again, this time louder, more frantic. "Ethan, please, I just want to talk." I didn't answer. Linda stood beside me, unflinching. "You don't owe her anything." Jessica's voice cracked through the door again. "I'm pregnant." The words struck like lightning. My breath caught. Linda turned to me, her eyes scanning my face. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to believe it was just another manipulation, another ploy to regain control, but another part, the part that had once loved her, needed to know. "If it's true," I whispered. "I need to know." Linda hesitated, then stepped back. I opened the door. Jessica took a shaky step forward, her face pale and hollow. "It's yours," she said. I didn't know who else to turn to. I stared at her, numb. The storm I thought I had escaped was now standing on the porch, asking to be let back in. Behind me, Linda didn't say a word, but I could feel her presence, steady, supportive, waiting for me to decide. Whatever happened next, I knew this was a turning point, one that would change everything again. Jessica stood on the porch, trembling. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, but the moment I opened the door, she composed herself just enough to look me in the eyes. "Please, can we talk inside?" she whispered. I glanced back at Linda, who stood a few steps away in the hallway, arms crossed. Her expression wasn't angry. It was calm, resigned, but firm. She gave me the slightest nod, not of approval, but permission. I stepped aside. Jessica entered the house like a ghost. unsure of her place, her eyes darting to the pictures on the wall, to Linda's shoes by the door, to the faint scent of rosemary and lemon that lingered in the air. We sat in the living room, Jessica on the edge of the couch, me in the armchair opposite. Linda stayed in the kitchen, her presence a silent anchor. Jessica fiddled with the hem of her sleeve. I didn't come here to cause problems. I just didn't know where else to go. I said nothing. I'm 6 weeks, she added. I've been to the doctor. A knot tightened in my stomach. 6 weeks. That would have been right around the time everything blew up. Maybe a little before. My mind raced timelines, possibilities, denials, fears. And it's mine? I asked, voice low. She nodded. It's not Lucas's. We hadn't. Not since before everything came out. I rubbed my face. The weight of everything pressed down harder now. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of it. But if it was true, if there was a child, I couldn't ignore that either. I'm not here to get back together, Jessica said quickly, seeing the look in my eyes. I don't want to do this alone, and I don't want to lie anymore. The irony hit hard. You lied for 6 months, Jess. You slept with my friend, you betrayed me, and now you want honesty? She winced. I deserve that. I do. But this isn't about us, it's about the baby. We sat in silence, the air between us thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Linda entered the room with a glass of water. She handed it to Jessica without a word, and sat beside me, placing a gentle hand on my knee. Jessica looked up. You're with her now? I hesitated. I don't know what this is yet, but she's been here. When everything fell apart, she was the only one who stayed. Jessica nodded slowly, a mix of sadness and acceptance in her eyes. I'll take a paternity test, she said. Whatever you need. I'm not trying to trap you, Ethan. I just needed you to know. She stood, adjusting her coat. I'll go now. I rose as well. I'll call you once I've thought things through. At the door, she turned. Thank you for listening. I didn't respond. I just closed the door behind her. Linda exhaled beside me, long and slow. We stood there, for a while neither speaking. The world outside was quiet again, but the storm inside me hadn't passed. She might be telling the truth, I murmured. She might, Linda said. And if she is? Then I'll do what's right, for the child. Linda nodded. And for yourself? I looked at her, really looked. The woman who had seen my worst and stayed anyway. For once, I said, I think I'll try to do both. 2 weeks passed like a quiet, drawn-out sigh. The kind that doesn't release tension, just delays it. I'd buried myself in work around the house, tuned up the Mustang twice even though it didn't need it, organized Linda's garage from top to bottom, and alphabetized every spice jar in the kitchen. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off the envelope sitting in the drawer. But avoidance never lasts. On a grey Tuesday afternoon, Linda found me sitting on the back porch staring blankly at the clouds. Without a word, she walked into the house and returned with the envelope, unopened, and placed it on the table between us. It's time, she said softly. I stared at it for a long while. My hands shook slightly as I reached forward and peeled it open. Positive. The child was mine. I didn't flinch, no gasp, no explosion, just stillness. A slow exhale. A recognition of something I'd already felt in my gut. Linda watched me with the same calm strength she'd offered since the beginning. Do you want to talk about it? I don't even know where to start, I said. It's like every version of the future I imagined just cracked down the middle. You don't have to figure it all out today. I nodded, but I did know one thing. I couldn't repeat the mistakes of the past. This child didn't ask to be born into chaos, and whatever happened between Jessica and me, I had a responsibility now, one I couldn't ignore. The next day, I called Jessica. We agreed to meet at a small diner on the edge of town, a place neither of us had history with. It was neutral ground, neither nostalgia nor resentment lingered in the air. Just coffee, cracked vinyl booths, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since 1998. Jessica looked worn down. Her makeup was subtle, her eyes puffy but clear. She didn't cry, not this time. Maybe she'd already done enough of that. I slid into the booth across from her. The waitress brought us 2 coffees without asking. Small-town habits. "So," Jessica said after a long pause, "I guess it's real." I nodded. "Yeah, it's real." She toyed with her spoon. "I'm not asking for anything more than what you're willing to give. I know I messed up. I lost you. And honestly, I deserve that." I took a sip of coffee. "I'm not here to punish you, Jess. That wouldn't help anyone. Least of all the baby." She looked up, blinking fast. "So what does this mean?" "It means I'll be there, doctor visits, support, co-parenting, but that's it. We're not going back, ever." Jessica nodded. "I didn't expect you to say yes, but thank you." I stood first, left cash on the table. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to stay friends. Just 2 people who had broken something beyond repair, now trying to build something better for someone else. When I got back to Linda's house, the sun had broken through the clouds. She was in the garden, trimming back lavender bushes, her hair pulled into a loose bun. Peaceful, present. I walked toward her slowly, not wanting to break the moment. She looked up and smiled. "Everything okay?" I shrugged. "Define okay." Linda wiped her hands and met me halfway. Did she take it well? As well as she could. We sat on the edge of the porch. The air smelled like warm earth and lemon balm. I turned to her. "Told her I'd be in the child's life. I have to be." Linda nodded. "I knew you would." I hesitated. "And I told her I wouldn't be in hers." She looked at me for a long beat, then reached for my hand. "What about mine?" she asked. "My..." Breath caught. "If you'll have me, I don't know what we are or what this is. But it's the only thing that's felt real in a long time." She smiled softly. "Let's not name it. Let's just keep building it." We sat there as the sun dipped lower, our fingers intertwined. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic kiss, just presence, just 2 people who'd survived the storm, choosing to walk into the calm together. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt like I was home.